The scripture reading this evening is from Genesis 13, starting in verse 7. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord.
Told you a couple of weeks ago that we would be doing a Sunday night series about different men in the Bible. Series called, always beginning with The Man. And, as we think about Lot, you always have to go forward and think about Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah are truly symbols of the worst kind of depravity, worst kind of immorality that can exist. And it seemed to have existed quite rampantly within those cities. As we saw in our scripture reading just a moment ago, that they were exceedingly sinful before the Lord. Even as you come up to that time of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, you see Abraham, this father of the faithful, talking with the Lord, right? The three angels come. Two of them are actual angels. One of them is the Lord himself. And as the two angels go on down to Sodom to remove Lot from the city, the Lord remains and talks to Abraham. And I love it because he asked the question, should I tell him what we're about to do? Should I go ahead and share this with him? And so he does. He tells him what's going to happen. And Abraham, as we know, begins to bargain for these cities, right? He starts with 50. If there's just 50 righteous people in there. And God relents on that. And then he brings it down. He keeps bringing the number down. He gets all the way down to 10. And God says, if there are 10 righteous people in the city, I will not destroy it. And then God leaves the scene. The Lord leaves. And so there's no more dealing. That was his bottom number on that particular occasion. And so even with Abraham trying to intercede, the only people that are saved from the destruction of the city of Sodom is Lot and his nephew Lot and Lot's daughters, two daughters that he had with him. Even with divine warning delivered by angels to Lot, who came into the city and even had to be protected through striking the people blind because they wanted to sexually assault them there at Lot's house. They came and they warned him and they told him, and yet it's going to reach a point that Lot lingers in that city far too long. And Lot continues to linger even as these angels warn him, and it reaches the point that the angels literally take him by the arm and drag him basically out of the city. And so that's where I want us to think about Lot as the man who lingered. He lingered far too long, and I don't know if that lingering is one of the things that may have cost him his wife in her actions of looking back. But certainly he should have been taking what the angels were telling him certainly more seriously. Let's think about Lot's background. Let's look at the man. In chapter 11 and verse 27 of Genesis, we see that he is Abraham's nephew. Now he's probably closer in age to Abraham. In fact, they're probably pretty close in age probably together, because Abraham is substantially younger than his two older brothers that we have recorded, Haran and Nahshon. So he has two older brothers, but there seems to be a substantial difference in their ages. And so Lot may be more, even though he's a nephew, he may be more akin to the age of Abraham. And so that might be why that they are fairly close in their relationship with one another. Abraham seemed to have a very close relationship with him. Lot continues to travel with him. Lot leaves, the family that they had there in Haran and joins and stays with Abraham as he travels into the land of Canaan. But as we see Lot, as the story develops with Lot and Abraham, we see that Lot is very different than Abraham. Lot is a man who walks by sight, while Abraham is a man who walks by faith. We read that just a moment ago. So they had large flocks. They're both very wealthy men, and they have large flocks, and the land where they're at just simply can't manage all of the flocks that they have, the water and the grasslands. It's just more livestock than the land can handle. And as a result, their shepherds are getting into conflicts with one another. And so Abraham doesn't want any conflict with Lot. He doesn't want to have a problem with Lot, so he takes Lot up on this hill. And Abraham, I want us to understand this because this isn't intonated in the text, and yet it is the reality of the situation. Abraham is the uncle. He doesn't have to offer Lot anything. By the patriarchal system, as the uncle, he could tell Lot where to go, and Lot would have been compelled to go. But that's not what Abraham does. Abraham has trust that no matter where he's at in the land of Canaan, God is going to take care of him. That's walking by faith. He says, Lot, you choose. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. It doesn't matter to me. I'll be taken care of either way. That's a great attitude, isn't it? But Lot isn't living by faith. He's living by sight. And he looks. And over here, the land toward the Mediterranean Sea, over to the west, it's a browner land. It's a less fertile land. And he looks over here to the east, and there is the Jordan Valley. And this is before the Dead Sea is there. This is before God destroys. In fact, Genesis even tells us that, right? Moses kind of gives that he says this is before the destruction. So it was a beautiful, said it was like Eden. Like the Garden of Eden that Adam and Eve was in, that it was lush. And he sees that land, and that is wonderful land for your flocks. He says, I want that. See, he's looking at sight. Knowing what's down there. Knowing the people that are down there. The cities that are down there. He makes that choice. And he goes down into that land while Abraham goes the other way. Well, initially, Lot just lives near Sodom. But yet, over time, it seems that he stops just living near Sodom and he moves into Sodom. He's living inside the city. And in fact, by the time we see those angels show up, he is sitting at the gate of the city. That's very important because what that says is that he's actually one of the leaders of the city. And so they come in and he's sitting at the gate of the city. And I remember when Jonah and I went into the city of Dan. They still have it's still very well preserved. But when you go in where the gate was, there's a wall there, and there's these round, flat stones along the ground, and that's where the elders sat. So you went to the gate, and you would see the elders or the leaders of the city there. And that seems to be where Lot was sitting here in the city of Sodom. And so he goes from just being near the city to living in the city, and not just living in the city, but actually being one of the leaders of the city. And that takes place over the course of about 20 years. So from the time that they divided from each other and he took to the land of Jordan, about 20 years are going to pass before we see the destruction, or maybe a little more than 20 years, somewhere between 20 and 25 years, and the destruction of the cities of the valley, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the other cities that were there in the valley. We do know this. We do know, based on what Peter tells us in the New Testament, that Lot was grieved by what he saw. He was troubled by all the sin that was around him. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verses 7 through 8 says this. And if he rescued righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, for by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. And so while Lot lived in the city, while Lot even appears to have been a leader in the city, Peter says he was still a man that was seeking to be righteous. And he was bothered by all that he saw. He was bothered by all that was around him going on, because he was a man that was righteous at heart. So that's Lot. But I want us to consider tonight the mistakes he made. Because he made some big mistakes, and they cost him terribly. The first mistake Lot makes is he made a wrong choice early in life. He made a choice based on how he could get ahead, how he could have more, how he could have ease even, by choosing the Jordan Valley, even though it was a place that was clearly filled with cities that were grossly evil. Lot's later life troubles came from that earlier mistake that he made in Genesis 13. It took 20 years for the consequences of that decision to come to their full fruition. There on that morning, as fire rained down on the city that he was living in. Sometimes, we can be like Lot. We can seek to take what is best now. We can seek to take what will make our lives easier, and yet sometimes those decisions are fraught with pitfalls for us. They are putting us in a direction that's not a real good direction. And maybe sometimes I think we almost think pridefully in our own hearts, well, I can overcome that. I can beat that. I can get ahead of that. I'm not going to be bothered by that. And clearly Lot doesn't seem like he was bothered by the immorality. It doesn't seem like he was a man that was trying to engage in it. But it was not a place where he needed to be. But so many times in our lives, whether it is a 20-year-old decision that we made or a week-old decision, it doesn't matter. Sometimes we make decisions and we pay for it at a later date. And a lot of our wounds that we have in this life are self-inflicted. Self-inflicted because we make choices that are poor. We make choices for the wrong reasons. You look at Genesis chapter 6, and the sons of God married the daughters of men. But when you look at the reason why, you get why they make a mistake. Because all they were looking at in their women was how they looked. Because they were beautiful. They weren't looking for godly women. They were looking for what was pretty on the outside, but they didn't look at the inside, right? And that had a terrible future problem. It led to the gross sin that would lead to the destruction of the world by the flood. And so there was certainly a delayed consequence to that shallow judgment that they exercised in the choosing of their wives there in Genesis chapter 6. And Lot makes a similar choice when he chooses the Jordan Valley. Second, we see that he wasn't as strong as he should have been. He lived among the Sodomites. He did not seem to be a part of their immorality. But yet, he doesn't seem to ever have been strong enough to remove himself from that situation. Righteous man really had no business in the city of Sodom, and apparently he was about the only one. There wasn't 10 others. There wasn't 9 others. And the most there could have been, and God keep His promise, right, is 8 others. But I have a feeling there was just one righteous man in the whole of the city of Sodom. But he didn't remove himself. He was troubled, but clearly not troubled enough to leave, to go somewhere else, to put himself in a better position. Too often Christians today also allow themselves to be in the midst of sinful behavior and sinful people rather than making a clear stand for what is right and removing themselves from those situations that could ultimately cause them problems in their lives, that can have consequences for the future, can erode away the spiritual strength in our lives. And so we need to be willing to remove ourselves. That's what Jesus is talking about when He says to cut off your hand if it offends you. Pluck out your eye. It's better to be without those things than to spend an eternity in hell. And it's better to not be around some people in this life, folks, than to be lost one day because of them, or to suffer some terrible consequence because of them. And so we have to make those kind of decisions if we want to live right. You know, Paul is still correct in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 when he stated very clearly that evil communications corrupt good morals. You know, he also, when we think about Lot, he lost his influence for good. Those angels come to Lot's house and they tell him, and he believes them. He believes the city is going to be destroyed. But it tells us that he goes to his daughters and his sons-in-law. So he has other daughters there in the city of Sodom that have married men of Sodom. And he has no influence with them. It says that they looked at him and that he became a joke to them as he tried to tell them, as he tried to save their lives. He was a joke. So he lost his ability to influence people, even his own family. You know, when we do not stand firm, folks, on what is right, and if we don't do that on a consistent, everyday basis, I can promise you people will not take us seriously when we try to tell them about what is right and what is wrong. Well, I saw you last week and you didn't seem all that serious about it then. Folks, we're not serious about what is right and what is wrong and making those stands. When the day comes when we try to make a stand, people are going to make a joke of us. Where if we stand, they know that's who we are. And there's some people that while they may not like what you say, if you're willing to stand and be firm, they will respect you for that. But no one respects a wishy-washy person. No one goes, wow, he's a great guy. He never stands for anything real firmly. You're never going to hear that statement because that statement just simply is not one that's true. And yet Lot suffered the consequences for his family as a result of the fact that while he was righteous, he didn't make the stands that he should have made. He didn't make a serious claim to righteousness in a city like that. And last of all, we see that terrible incident where he sins with his daughters. It's a difficult story. You know, he ends up bargaining with the angels. He says, I'm too old to go as far as you're telling me to go. He actually saves one of the cities of the valley, Zorah, because they were going to be destroyed too. It's not just Sodom and Gomorrah. It's all the cities of the valley were destroyed that night. He said, I can't get there. Let me just get to Zorah. And so they said, okay. So the city of Zorah is spared because Lot said, I'm old. But they finally get out of the valley and they look back and all they can see is smoke rising like a furnace from the entire Jordan Valley. I think you could almost imagine it being like the entire area of the Dead Sea. And it's burning. And there is an idea when we read that text of what's going on with him and his daughter. They go and they get in a cave. And it seems as if they think they're all that's left. That everybody's been destroyed. Everybody's been burned up except them. That seems to be the idea that's going on in their heads. And maybe that scene was so incredibly huge that they had a hard time seeing anything else. But his daughters, they want children. But there's no men at the cave. And so they conspire to get Lot drunk in chapter 19 and verses 30 through 38. Allows them to get him drunk. And then they are impregnated by Lot, both of them. And so they have their father's children. You know, Lot's failure, his failures going back, I mean, this is still a product of chapter 13 and that choice to go into a place he had no business going. But Lot's failures left a legacy of sin with his family. A legacy of sin with his daughters. A legacy of sins with his wife, who was so attached that she was having a hard time leaving the city, to the extent that God would turn her into a pillar of salt because of her unwillingness to go, her looking back when she wasn't supposed to. But it all begins with the decision that Lot made. But we see that he was a man that lingered far too long in a place he had no business lingering in. And we need to make certain that we do not do that in our lives. You know, folks, it's the same for us. We're going to leave a legacy. The question is, are we going to leave a legacy of righteousness, devotion to God, faithfulness, zealous for God's works? Or are we going to leave a legacy of faithlessness, of being kind of hanging where we shouldn't hang, of kind of being just middle of the road, not really committed, not really, just kind of going along to get along kind of people who never get any respect and never have any real influence? We will influence people around us. We will influence our families one way or the other by the lives that we live. I hope that you will beware of the kind of mistakes that Lot made. Young people, you're in the early years of your life, and you think that there's nothing that you're choosing right now that you can't overcome in time, but I can promise you there are things that if you don't choose wisely can impact you for the rest of your life. You need to choose wisely. You need to choose wisely with every choice that you make. You need to do that any time in life. It doesn't matter whether you're young, you're old, or you know, in the twilight of your life. It doesn't really matter. The decision I make today can destroy me spiritually tomorrow. I need to be careful with my decisions. And you need to be careful with yours, that we don't make the mistake that Lot made and suffer negative consequences in the future because of it. We need to know that our failures can live on in others long after we leave this earth. I have seen people leave this earth, and I've seen their children and their grandchildren be just like them because that's what they saw, because that's what they were taught. That was the example that they followed. So long after you leave this earth, there's going to be little bits of you still living on in those that you left behind. We also need to be very aware that we do not linger with sin. That we don't put ourselves in sinful places. That we don't put ourselves, we don't find ourselves unequally yoked, as Paul says, to sinful people. Because that is a recipe for disaster. I have heard many a young person say, well, I'm going to try to teach them, but I'm afraid that more times than not, that constant fellowship with it tends to go the other way. And while I have no problem with teaching people, and I certainly would encourage that, we do not associate and hang around with that which would lead us into sin, or people that are engaged in sinful actions. That's going to be a problem for us. Are our lives becoming, as we think about it and we look at our lives and we look at where we stand on a daily basis and how people look at us, are our lives becoming a joke because maybe we're not committed to the truth as we should? Maybe we won't state it like we should. Folks, there are so many issues right now that Christians are so afraid to even open their mouths about, and yet they are the fundamental issues that we need to address that are going on in our world today and in our society. And if we keep our mouths shut, then we'll be a joke. You say you're a Christian, you say you believe, or you're pro-life, or you're this, or you're that, but you don't really have an argument. You don't really make a stand. And you'll be a joke in their eyes. Or are we seen instead for our strength and our resolve and our willingness to teach the truth in love in every situation? To do those things that are right. May we never linger in a life of sin. Tonight, if you're not living your life as you should, I hope that you don't linger there another day. Because we're not guaranteed another day. And there's going to be, on the day that Jesus Christ appears in the air, there's going to be a large number of people that are lingering in sin, thinking, I'll get it fixed later. And when He appears, time ends, and so does later. It's over. It's gone. And eternity begins. And there is no past, present, or future in eternity. So there is no later. Don't linger. Because it might be too late. If we can help you this evening to get out of that place of lingering and move into a place of righteousness, of faith, to a place like Abraham was in. A person who walks based on what they know God can do. Not on what they see and what they think they can obtain out here with their eyes, but what they believe with faith God will do and bless them with. That's what we need to be. If we can help you be that, won't you let us as we stand as we sing.